Welcome back to Horror Vault channel. In this video, I will be telling you the 7 most disturbing yet true Valentine's Day horror stories. This is the part 2 in this series. You can check out our part 1 video whose link is provided in the description below. I would highly recommend you subscribing to Horror Vault if you haven't done, so that you will be the first one to get notification of our latest videos. Okay, without further delay, let's get to the first true Valentine's Day horror story. Story 1. The Valentine's Day Tragedy. It was supposed to be a night of love, a celebration of what we had built together. But instead, it became the darkest day of my life. A day that would haunt me forever. My name is Riva Steenkamp, and this is my story. February 13th, 2013. Oscar and I had been dating for a few months. And though our relationship had its ups and downs, I believed in him. He was a man who had overcome so much, his disability, the criticism from the world. And yet he carried himself with a determination that inspired me. I admired his strength and his resilience. But there were moments when his temper frightened me. Still, I convinced myself that it was just the pressure he faced as a public figure. That evening, Oscar and I planned to spend Valentine's Day together at his home in Pretoria. He had promised me a romantic dinner, followed by a quiet night watching movies. I was excited. Despite our occasional arguments, I loved him deeply and wanted to make things work. I packed an overnight bag with care, choosing a red dress I knew he liked. As I drove to his house, I thought about the card I had written for him earlier that day. It wasn't as cheerful as the ones I'd given him before. It reflected the tension we'd been experiencing lately. But it also expressed my hope that we could move past our differences and find happiness together. February 14th, 2013, 1 a.m. The evening started beautifully. Oscar had prepared dinner. Candles lit the dining table and soft music played in the background. We laughed and reminisced about how we met at a party months ago. For a while, it felt like everything would be okay. But as the night wore on, something shifted. A comment I made about one of his friends seemed to irritate him. His mood darkened quickly, and the warmth in his eyes turned cold. "You don't understand what it's like," he said sharply. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Being me," he snapped. "Always being watched, judged. You don't know what that feels like." I reached out to touch his hand, but he pulled away. "Oscar," I said gently, "I'm here for you. You don't have to face this alone." He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up abruptly and walked out of the room. I sat there in silence, unsure of what to do. 2 a.m. I decided to give him space and went upstairs to get ready for bed. As I brushed my teeth in the ensuite bathroom, I heard him pacing downstairs. His footsteps were heavy, agitated. I tried not to let it bother me. This wasn't the first time Oscar had been moody or withdrawn. He often struggled with anxiety and stress. But tonight felt different. There was an edge to his behavior that unsettled me. I climbed into bed and waited for him to join me. Minutes turned into an hour, but he didn't come upstairs. 3 a.m. A noise startled me awake. A loud bang from downstairs. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, straining to hear what was happening. "Oscar?" I called out tentatively. There was no response. I got out of bed and tiptoed toward the staircase. The house was eerily quiet except for the faint sound of movement coming from the kitchen. "Oscar?" I called again, louder this time. Still no answer. Fear began to creep in as I made my way back to the bedroom. Something didn't feel right. His behavior earlier combined with the strange silence was unnerving. I decided to lock myself in the bathroom until morning, 3:15 a.m. As I sat on the bathroom floor with my knees pulled up to my chest, I heard footsteps approaching the bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat as they stopped just outside. "Riva?" Oscar's voice called out softly. Relief washed over me momentarily until I realized there was something off about his tone. It sounded strained, almost menacing. "Yes," I replied hesitantly through the closed door. "Why did you lock yourself in there?" he asked sharply. I thought someone might be in the house," I stammered. There was silence on the other side of the door before he spoke again. This time louder. "Open this door." Panic set in as his voice grew angrier with each demand for me to unlock it. My hands trembled as tears streamed down my face. I didn't know what to do or how this had escalated so quickly. 3:20 a.m. Then came the gunshots. Four deafening blasts that shattered any hope of escape or resolution. The first bullet tore through wood. Splinters flew around me like shrapnel as pain exploded across my chest where another bullet struck true. Darkness closed in around me. When Oscar finally broke down the door with a cricket bat hours later, it was too late. For him, for me, for us. What should have been a day filled with love became one marked by tragedy. A Valentine's Day neither of us would ever forget. Story 2. The Valentine's Day Encounter. I used to love Valentine's Day. The decorations, the themed items, and the cheerful atmosphere at Walmart, where I worked, always brought a smile to my face. It was a day filled with love and celebration, even if I wasn't the most romantic person. But now, all that's changed. Valentine's Day is no longer a day of joy for me. It's a day I dread every year. It reminds me of the single most horrifying experience of my life. It was February 14th, just a few years ago. I had been working at Walmart for almost 2 years by then. Normally, I requested Valentine's Day off, or if I was scheduled to work, I would trade shifts with a coworker. But that year, no one was willing to switch with me. So there I was, stuck working an 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. shift on Valentine's Day. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. My boyfriend and I had planned to celebrate after work. So I resigned myself to getting through the day. After all, it was just another shift. The encounter. It happened shortly after my lunch break. I was walking past one of the Valentine's Day displays when I noticed an older man browsing through the romantic items. He looked harmless, sweet even. His gray hair and oversized sweater made him seem like someone's kind grandfather, maybe searching for a gift for his wife or a special someone at a retirement home. I smiled and approached him, curious about his story. "Who's the lucky one?" I asked playfully. He seemed startled at first, but quickly composed himself. His reaction only made him seem more endearing. "There's no one special," he said with a wistful smile. "Just an old romantic who can't help but feel nostalgic looking at all this." He spoke about past loves in a way that tugged at my heartstrings. For a moment, I felt sorry for him, a lonely man reminiscing about days gone by. But as he continued talking, something about his tone shifted. His words became disjointed, jumping from one thought to another in a way that didn't make sense. At first, I thought I had misunderstood him or lost track of the conversation. But soon it became clear he wasn't well. And then I noticed something else. He wasn't as old as I had initially thought. Despite his gray hair and elderly demeanor, his energy was almost manic. He seemed to vibrate with nervous energy, his eyes darting around as if searching for something or someone. I decided it was time to end the conversation. "Well," I said with a polite smile, "good luck finding what you're looking for." I turned to walk away, but before I could take more than a step or two, he grabbed my wrist. The shift from sweet to sinister. At first, his touch wasn't forceful, just enough to stop me in my tracks. But it sent alarm bells ringing in my head. "Will you be my Valentine?" he asked. His tone was both childlike and menacing, an unsettling combination that made my stomach churn. I laughed nervously, thinking, or maybe hoping, that he was joking. "Sorry," I said quickly. "I already have someone." I tried to pull my wrist free from his grip, but his hand tightened around it like a vice. His face turned red as veins bulged in his neck and forehead. His entire body trembled with an intensity that terrified me. "Please let go," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. But he didn't let go. Instead, he leaned in close, so close that I could feel his breath on my face. and began to sing softly under his breath. I know you belong to somebody new, but tonight you belong to me. His voice shook as he sang, and tears welled up in his eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer force of whatever emotion was overtaking him. Panic surged through me as I began screaming for help. But before anyone could come to my aid, his free hand shot up and wrapped around my throat. He pushed me backward into one of the shelves with such force that items toppled onto the floor around us. The struggle. I couldn't breathe. His hand squeezed tighter around my neck, while his other hand moved somewhere it shouldn't have gone, a violation that filled me with both rage and fear. Something inside me snapped then. A primal instinct for survival took over. With every ounce of strength I had left, I clawed at his face and kicked at his legs until finally, he loosened his grip just enough for me to scream again. That scream must have been loud enough because moments later, another customer came running down the aisle and tackled a man to the ground with such force that they both nearly knocked over another display shelf. The scene that followed was chaos. The man thrashed and screamed like an animal caught in a trap as security guards rushed in to restrain him until the police arrived. Even then, he fought wildly, biting one of the guards and foaming at the mouth like some kind of rabid beast. When the police finally took him away in handcuffs, I collapsed onto the floor in tears. Walmart sent me to trauma counseling after that incident, a gesture that felt more like damage control than genuine concern for my well-being. They also promised to improve store security in an email sent out to all employees, but those promises felt hollow too. As for the man who attacked me, he was declared mentally unfit to stand trial and sent to a psychiatric hospital in another state instead of prison. The lingering trauma. 4 months after that day, I struggled with anxiety and nightmares. The sound of someone singing softly could send me into a full-blown panic attack. And then there was that song, the one he sang while choking me. I know you belong to somebody new, but tonight you belong to me. Hearing it again by chance at a diner months later triggered such an intense reaction that I ran out without even paying for my meal. It took years of therapy and self-work to reclaim some semblance of normalcy in my life. And even now, on some days, it feels like an uphill battle. Valentine's Day is forever ruined for me, not because of heartbreak or loneliness, but because of terror, because of him. And every year, when February 14th rolls around again, all those memories come flooding back, reminding me how quickly something sweet can turn into something sinister. Story 3. The Valentine's Day Murder. It was Valentine's Day, 2001, a day that should have been filled with love and celebration. For years, John and Susan Hamilton had been the envy of their friends and neighbors. Their marriage seemed picture perfect. John, a successful obstetrician gynecologist in Oklahoma City, was known for showering Susan with expensive gifts and grand romantic gestures. From the outside, their love seemed unshakable. But behind closed doors, cracks had started to form. And on that fateful Valentine's Day, everything came crashing down. The morning of Valentine's Day. I remember waking up that morning feeling a strange sense of unease. It wasn't unusual for John to leave early for work. He had a surgery scheduled at his clinic that morning. But something about the way he kissed me goodbye felt different. It was hurried, almost mechanical, as if he were distracted or preoccupied. I tried to shake off the feeling as I went about my day. I had planned to surprise him with a romantic dinner that evening, complete with his favorite wine and a handwritten card. The card wasn't as cheerful as usual. It reflected some of the tension we'd been experiencing lately, but I hoped it would remind him of how much I loved him, despite everything. John had promised to come home during his lunch break, so we could exchange gifts before he returned to the clinic for another surgery. I spent the morning tidying up the house and preparing for our brief celebration. By noon, I was anxiously waiting for him to walk through the door. The discovery. When John finally arrived home, he called out my name as he entered the house. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to surprise him by waiting upstairs in our bedroom. But when he didn't hear me answer, he came looking for me. That's when he found me. I can only imagine what went through his mind as he walked into the bathroom and saw my lifeless body lying on the floor in a pool of blood. My face was unrecognizable, battered beyond recognition by repeated blows from a blunt object. Around my neck were two of John's silk ties, twisted tightly in a makeshift garrote. John called 911 immediately, his voice frantic as he begged for help. My wife, he cried into the phone. She's not breathing. Please send someone quickly. When paramedics arrived at the scene, they found John performing CPR on me, or at least attempting to. But something about his efforts seemed off. His technique was clumsy and ineffective, which struck them as strange given his medical training. The investigation begins. As news of my death spread, shockwaves rippled through our community. No one could believe that something so horrific had happened to someone like me, a loving wife who had always supported her husband's demanding career. But as investigators began piecing together what had happened that day, suspicion quickly fell on John. There were no signs of forced entry into our home, which suggested that whoever killed me either had a key or was let in willingly. Nothing appeared to be stolen. All our valuables were still in place. And then there was a card I had written for John, the one that police found on the kitchen counter. Its message was hauntingly prescient. I love you, but sometimes I don't know if you feel the same way. Friends and family members came forward with stories about our marriage. Stories that painted a very different picture from the one we had presented to the world. They spoke of arguments behind closed doors and moments when John's temper flared uncontrollably. One friend even revealed that I had confided in her about considering divorce after discovering that John had been making frequent calls to a topless dancer. The betrayal had shattered my trust in him, but I hadn't yet mustered the courage to leave. The trial, when John was arrested and charged with my murder, it felt like a nightmare come to life for everyone who knew us. How could a man who claimed to love me so deeply be capable of such violence? During the trial, prosecutors argued that John had killed me in a fit of rage after an argument about his infidelity. They pointed to the blood spatter on his shirt as evidence, patterns that suggested he had been much closer to me during my final moments than he claimed. John maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings, insisting that he had come home to find me already dead and had tried desperately to save me. His defense team brought in character witnesses who described him as a devoted husband incapable of such brutality. But then came the testimony that sealed his fate. A forensic expert hired by John's own defense team took the stand and revealed something chilling. Small droplets of blood inside the sleeve of John's shirt. Droplets consistent with someone swinging an object rather than performing CPR. It was damning evidence that couldn't be explained away. The verdict. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. John was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment that many felt was fitting for someone who had taken another person's life so violently and senselessly. For those who knew us both, it was almost impossible to reconcile the image of Dr. John Hamilton, the caring physician and loving husband, with the cold-blooded killer described in court. But as more details emerged about our relationship, the lies, the betrayals, it became clear that our perfect marriage had been anything but. Even now, years later, people still talk about what happened on Valentine's Day, 2001, the day love turned into horror in an instant. Some say they saw it coming. Others insist they never would have guessed. As for me, my story has become a cautionary tale. A reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even those closest to us can harbor dark secrets capable of destroying everything we hold dear. And every year on February 14th, while couples exchange flowers and chocolates, I wonder if anyone remembers what happened here, or if they've chosen to forget. Story 4. The Teddy Bear with the Hidden Eye. Valentine's Day had always been my favorite holiday. I loved the romance, the decorations, and the chance to make someone feel special. But that all changed last year. Now, February 14th is a day I dread. A reminder of just how vulnerable I was and how easily trust can turn into terror. It started innocently enough. His name was Isaac. We met on Instagram where he sent me a kind, thoughtful message about one of my art posts. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't usually respond to strangers online, but something about him seemed genuine. He wasn't pushy or overbearing. He just seemed nice. Over the next few weeks, we talked every day. He was funny, intelligent, and charming in a way that felt effortless. It didn't take long before I started to look forward to his messages. He lived in Florida while I was in Texas, so meeting in person wasn't an option yet, but we made it work. By Valentine's Day, we were officially in a long-distance relationship. That morning, Isaac called me with a surprise. "I sent you something," he said excitedly. "It should be on your porch by tonight." I laughed, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he replied. "You deserve it." The package arrived around 7 p.m., a huge cardboard box that I could barely drag into my living room. My heart raced with excitement as I grabbed a knife to cut it open. Inside was the biggest teddy bear I'd ever seen, soft plush, and almost as tall as me. I couldn't help but smile. It was adorable and thoughtful, the kind of gift you dream of receiving on Valentine's Day. I immediately texted Isaac to thank him. "It's perfect," I wrote. "You're amazing. Glad you like it." He replied with a winking emoji. I spent the rest of the evening talking to him on the phone while cuddling the bear on my couch. It felt like the perfect Valentine's Day, a sweet gift from someone who genuinely cared about me. But then things started to get strange. The game. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, Isaac called again. "Let's play a game," he suggested. "What kind of game?" I asked. "It's simple," he said. "I'll ask you questions about your room, and you try to guess what I'm thinking." I laughed nervously but agreed. It sounded harmless enough. "What color are your socks?" he asked first. "Blue," I said confidently. "Correct," he exclaimed. I smiled, impressed by his lucky guess. But as the game went on, his accuracy became unsettling. He knew details about my room that I hadn't mentioned, like the color of my curtains or the book lying open on my nightstand. "How do you know this stuff?" I asked jokingly, trying to mask my discomfort. "I just have a good imagination," he replied with a laugh. Something about his tone sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't playful anymore, it felt calculated. The red light. After we hung up, I climbed into bed with the teddy bear beside me. Its soft fur was comforting against my skin as I tried to shake off the unease from our conversation. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A faint red light blinking inside the bear's left eye. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was just a reflection from my phone or some trick of the light. But when it blinked again, steady and deliberate, I knew it wasn't my imagination. My heart pounded as I stared at the bear in disbelief. Slowly, I reached out and turned its head toward me. The light blinked again, and this time there was no mistaking it. There was something inside the bear. Panic surged through me as I grabbed a pair of scissors from my desk and began cutting into its face. My hands shook violently as stuffing spilled out onto my bed. And then there it was. A tiny camera nestled inside the bear's eye socket. The realization, I stumbled backward in horror, dropping both the bear and the camera onto the floor. My mind raced with questions. How long had it been there? What had it recorded? And most importantly, why? I grabbed my phone and called Isaac immediately. "You put a camera in the bear," I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and fear. There was silence on the other end of the line before he finally spoke. "I just wanted to see you," he said softly, almost apologetically. "I missed you. You're insane." I screamed before hanging up and blocking his number. But even after ending the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me somehow, that he had been watching me all along. The next morning, I went straight to the police station with the bear and camera in tow. They took my statement and opened an investigation into Isaac's identity. But when they tried to track him down online, they found nothing. His social media accounts had been deleted overnight, and his phone number was disconnected. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep without checking every corner of my apartment for hidden cameras or listening devices. Every creak or shadow made me jump. Every unfamiliar face on the street felt like him in disguise. Eventually, I moved to a new apartment under a different name, hoping that would be enough to escape whatever twisted obsession Isaac had with me. A lingering fear. It's been a year since that Valentine's Day nightmare, but its effects still linger. The teddy bear is gone, burned along with everything else that reminded me of him. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still see that blinking red light staring back at me, like an unblinking eye watching from the darkness. And every February 14th, when couples exchange gifts and declarations of love, all I can think about is how easily trust can be twisted into terror. How quickly love can turn into obsession. Story 5. The Valentine's Day that changed everything. Valentine's Day used to be my favorite holiday. I loved everything about it. The decorations, the chocolates, the little trinkets that filled the aisles at Walmart where I worked. It was a day of love, hope, and celebration. But all of that changed one February 14th, and now, every year when the date approaches, I feel a knot of dread in my stomach. It started like any other day. I had tried to get the day off. Valentine's Day was always busy at the store, and I wanted to spend it with my boyfriend. But no one was willing to switch shifts with me. So I resigned myself to an 8-hour shift surrounded by pink and red displays. My boyfriend and I had planned a late dinner after work, so I figured I could get through the day. The store was bustling with last-minute shoppers. Couples wandered through the aisles hand in hand, picking out cards and gifts. It was sweet, really. Around lunchtime, I took a break and grabbed a coffee from the employee lounge before heading back to the floor. That's when I noticed him. He was standing near one of the Valentine's displays. A man in his mid-50s, with graying hair and a slightly hunched posture. At first glance, he seemed harmless, even endearing. He was holding a small stuffed bear in one hand and examining a box of chocolates with the other. Something about him struck me as sweet. A man shopping for someone he loved. I approached him with a smile. Looking for something special? I asked. He jumped slightly at my voice, startled out of his thoughts. "Oh," he said, his voice soft but shaky. Yes, I suppose I am. For your wife, I guess." He hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. No wife," he murmured. "Just memories." Something about his answer tugged at my heartstrings. He seemed lonely in a way that made me want to help him. "Well," I said gently, "whoever she is, she's lucky to have someone who cares enough to pick out something nice." For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then he smiled a slow, almost childlike grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're very kind," he said softly. I nodded awkwardly and turned to walk away, but before I could take more than a step, I felt his hand on my wrist. "Wait," he said quickly. I froze. His grip wasn't tight. Not yet, but it was firm enough to make my heart race. "Do you have someone special?" he asked. "Yes," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a boyfriend." He tilted his head slightly as if considering this information. Then he smiled again, this time wider than before, and said something that sent chills down my spine. "Would you be my Valentine?" For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. His tone was lighthearted, almost playful, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at me, like he wasn't asking so much as demanding an answer. I forced a nervous laugh and gently tried to pull my wrist free from his grip. "That's very sweet of you," I said carefully, but like I said, I already have someone. His smile faltered for just a moment before returning, bigger and more forced than before. "But you're perfect," he whispered. I felt my stomach drop as his grip tightened around my wrist, no longer gentle but firm enough to hurt. "Please let go," I said firmly, instead of releasing me. He leaned in closer, so close that I could feel his breath against my face, and began to hum softly under his breath. At first, it sounded like nonsense, a tuneless murmur, but then the words began to form. I know you belong to somebody new, but tonight you belong to me. My blood ran cold as recognition dawned on me. It was an old song from the 1950s that my grandmother used to play on her record player when I was a kid. But hearing it now, sung in this man's trembling voice while he held me captive, made it feel sinister. Help! I screamed as loudly as I could. Before anyone could respond, his other hand shot up and wrapped around my throat. He pushed me backward into one of the shelves with enough force to make several items tumble onto the floor around us. I struggled against him, kicking and clawing at his arms, but he was stronger than he looked. His face twisted into an expression of rage as tears streamed down his cheeks. "You're mine," he hissed through gritted teeth. I don't know where the strength came from. Maybe it was adrenaline or sheer desperation, but somehow I managed to knee him hard in the stomach. He let out a grunt of pain and loosened his grip just long enough for me to shove him away and scream again for help. This time, someone heard me. A man who had been shopping nearby came running down the aisle and tackled my attacker to the ground just as he lunged toward me again. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. Store security rushing in, customers gathering around, police arriving on the scene, but eventually they managed to restrain him and take him away in handcuffs. As they led him out of the store, he turned back toward me one last time with that same unsettling smile on his face and whispered, "You'll always be mine." In the weeks that followed, I learned more about him than I ever wanted to know. His name was Richard. He had no family or close friends. He had been diagnosed with severe mental illness years earlier, but had refused treatment. And this wasn't his first violent incident involving women. He was declared unfit to stand trial and sent to a psychiatric hospital in another state, where, according to authorities, he would remain indefinitely. But even knowing that he was locked away didn't bring me peace. Not entirely. 4 months after the attack, I couldn't sleep without double-checking every lock in my apartment or jumping at every unexpected noise outside my window. And then there was the song. The first time it happened was about 6 months later. I was having lunch with a friend at our favorite diner when it came on over the jukebox. I Know You Belong. My chest tightened as panic set in. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't stay there another second without feeling like Richard was standing right behind me again, whispering those same haunting words into my ear. Even now, years later, I can't hear that song without feeling like he's still out there somewhere watching, waiting, ready for another chance to make me his. Valentine's Day will never be just another holiday for me again. It's become an annual reminder of how quickly love can turn into obsession, how easily kindness can be mistaken for something else entirely, how fragile safety really is when faced with true madness disguised as romance. And most importantly, it's become proof that monsters don't always hide under beds or lurk in shadows. Sometimes they stand right in front of you, wearing smiles warm enough to fool anyone who isn't looking closely enough. So if you ever find yourself wondering whether small acts of kindness really matter, remember the story. And remember, sometimes they do matter, but not always ways expect them to. Story 6. The Bear with the Watching Eyes. Valentine's Day had always been bittersweet for me. I wasn't one of those people who hated the holiday, but I never really celebrated it either. That all changed when I met Isaac. We connected on Instagram. He sent me a direct message one day, complimenting a photo of a painting I had posted. It was simple, sweet, and unexpected. From that first message, we started talking every day about art, life, and everything in between. Isaac was charming, thoughtful, and funny. He lived in Florida while I was in Texas, but the distance didn't seem to matter. Over the course of a month, we grew close. Closer than I'd ever thought possible with someone I'd never met in person. By Valentine's Day, we were officially a couple. He asked me over the phone if I'd be his girlfriend, and I said yes without hesitation. It felt like the start of something magical. That evening, Isaac told me he had sent me a surprise. A Valentine's Day gift that would arrive by nightfall. My heart fluttered at the thought of his gesture. I couldn't remember the last time someone had gone out of their way to do something so thoughtful for me. When the doorbell rang around 8 p.m., my excitement peaked. I opened the door to find an enormous cardboard box sitting on my porch. It was so big that I struggled to drag it inside. What could this possibly be? I muttered to myself as I grabbed a knife to cut through the tape. Inside was a giant teddy bear, easily 4 feet tall, soft and plush with a red bow around its neck. I gasped in delight as I lifted it out of the box. It was adorable and perfect. Isaac called me just as I was setting the bear on my bed. "Do you like it?" he asked eagerly. "I love it," I said, hugging the bear tightly. "It's so sweet of you." We spent the rest of the evening talking on the phone while I lounged on my bed with the bear beside me. Isaac made me laugh and blush with his compliments and jokes. For once, Valentine's Day felt special. But then things started to feel off. It began later that night when Isaac suggested we play a game before bed. A game where we'd ask each other questions about our surroundings and try to guess the answers. "What color are your socks?" he asked. "Blue," I replied confidently. "Correct," he said with a chuckle. "How did you know?" I asked, laughing nervously. "Lucky guess," he said quickly before moving on to his next question. At first, it seemed harmless, just a fun way to pass time, but as we played, my unease grew. No matter what question I asked him about my room or what I was wearing, he always got it right. Every single time. "How do you know these things?" I finally asked, trying to keep my tone light, but failing to hide my discomfort. "We're just connected," he said softly. "I feel like I know you better than anyone." His words were meant to be sweet, but they sent chills down my spine. Something about his tone felt wrong. "I think I'm going to head to bed," I said abruptly, cutting our conversation short. "Good night," he said cheerfully before hanging up. I tried to brush off my unease as paranoia brought on by exhaustion. But when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, something caught my eye. The faint glow of a red light coming from the teddy bear's face. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The room was dark except for the faint moonlight streaming through my window. But as I stared at the bear's face, there it was again, a tiny red light blinking from its left eye. My heart began to race as panic set in. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the bear and leaned in close to examine its eye. The light blinked again, steady and deliberate, as if mocking me for not noticing sooner. I grabbed my phone and turned on its flashlight, shining it directly at the bear's face. What I saw made my blood run cold. Embedded in its left eye was a small camera lens. I stumbled back in shock, nearly dropping my phone as terror coursed through me. My mind raced with questions. How long had it been there? Was Isaac watching me right now? Had he been watching me all day? Without thinking, I grabbed a pair of scissors from my desk and began cutting into the bear's fabric with trembling hands. Stuffing spilled out onto the floor as I tore through its chest until finally, buried deep inside its torso, I found what I feared most. A small black device connected to wires. A hidden camera. I screamed and threw the bear across the room as tears streamed down my face. My hands shook uncontrollably as I dialed 911 and explained everything to the dispatcher through sobs. The police arrived within minutes and confiscated both the camera and what remained of the bear for evidence. They assured me they would investigate Isaac and track him down if necessary. But when they tried contacting him using the phone number he had given me, it was disconnected. His social media accounts were gone too, completely wiped from existence, as if he had never been there at all. Days turned into weeks with no updates from law enforcement about their investigation. Meanwhile, paranoia consumed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Isaac was still out there somewhere watching, waiting, planning his next move. Months later, long after Valentine's Day had passed, I received an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words scrawled across it in familiar handwriting. "You're still mine." That night changed everything for me. Not just how I view Valentine's Day, but how much trust one places in people who seem too good to be true. Because sometimes love isn't love at all. It's obsession disguised as affection, manipulation masquerading as romance, danger lurking behind kind words and thoughtful gestures. And sometimes even teddy bears have eyes that see far more than they should. This is how one Valentine's Day turned into my worst nightmare, and why every February 14th since has been haunted by memories of him. Story 7. The Fire That Never Died. Valentine's Day used to be my favorite holiday. I loved the idea of celebrating love, even if it wasn't perfect. But now, every February 14th feels like a warning. A reminder of how quickly love can turn into something terrifying. It all started with her, Emily. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my world. Emily was beautiful, smart, and passionate about art. She had this fire in her that drew me in, and for a while, we were inseparable. But as much as I loved her, there was always something unsettling beneath the surface. Emily was possessive. At first, it felt flattering. Her jealousy made me feel wanted. But over time, it became suffocating. She questioned everything. Who I texted, where I went, even casual mentions of my sister. Once, I told her about a funny story involving my sister, and she immediately accused me of cheating. It was exhausting. We dated for 17 months, 17 intense, chaotic months filled with some of the best and worst moments of my life. By the time our second Valentine's Day together approached, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. The relationship had become toxic, and I needed out. Breaking up with Emily wasn't easy. When I told her it was over, she cycled through every emotion imaginable: denial, anger, sadness. She begged me to stay, accused me of ruining her life, and then finally accepted it with tears streaming down her face. She asked if we could still be friends, but I knew that wasn't possible. I had to cut all contact to move on. For a month after the breakup, things were quiet. Too quiet. I thought maybe Emily had moved on too. But then Valentine's Day came. I spent most of that day alone in my apartment. It felt strange not having plans after being with Emily for so long. By evening, I was nursing a beer on my couch when my phone buzzed with a text message. We were supposed to burn together. My heart sank as I stared at the screen. It was from Emily. I recognized the number immediately, even though I deleted her contact. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Burn together was something we used to say when our relationship felt intense and all-consuming. I debated whether to respond, but decided against it. Instead, I turned off my phone and tried to distract myself with TV. But no matter what I watched or how much beer I drank, her words lingered in my mind. Later that night, just as I was starting to drift off on the couch, my phone buzzed again. Now you'll burn alone. Goosebumps prickled across my skin as I read the message. It felt like a threat, but surely she didn't mean it literally. Emily could be dramatic, but she wasn't dangerous, right? I tried to shake off the unease and went to bed. But around midnight, the smell of smoke jolted me awake. At first, I thought maybe I'd left something on in the kitchen, maybe the oven or a candle. But when I opened my bedroom door, thick black smoke greeted me in the hallway. My heart pounded as panic set in. The fire alarm blared as I grabbed my phone and ran barefoot out of the apartment building into the freezing February night. Other tenants were already outside in their pajamas and coats, huddled together as they watched flames consume part of the building. It wasn't until later that night, after firefighters had extinguished the blaze, that I learned where it had started. In the apartment directly below mine. The next few days were surreal. My apartment hadn't been destroyed by the fire itself, but was badly damaged by smoke and water from the sprinklers. While staying at my mom's house until repairs could be made, all I could think about were Emily's texts. Now you'll burn alone. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? The timing was too perfect or too horrifying to ignore. I called the police and told them everything about Emily's messages and how they seemed connected to the fire. They took down my statement, but assured me there was no evidence of arson. The The fire had been caused by faulty wiring in the apartment below mine. But even after hearing their explanation, something didn't sit right with me. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I called Emily. She answered on the second ring with an almost cheerful tone that sent chills down my spine. "Hello," she said brightly. "It's me," I said hesitantly. "I know what you did." There was a pause before she responded, just long enough for doubt to creep into my mind. But when she spoke again, her voice was calm and composed. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said smoothly. "You sent me those messages," I snapped. "And then there was a fire in my building." Another pause. This one longer than before, and then she laughed softly. "You think I started a fire?" she said incredulously. "That's insane." Her denial should have reassured me, but instead, it made me feel even more uneasy. Over time, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that happened. Repairs were made to my apartment building. Emily stopped contacting me. Valentine's Day came and went without incident for several years after that. But every now and then, usually late at night when everything is quiet, I can't help but wonder, what if Emily really did have something to do with that fire? What if she found a way to make good on her threat without leaving any evidence behind? I'll probably never know for sure, but one thing is certain. Valentine's Day will never feel safe again. Not for me anyway, because sometimes love doesn't just burn bright. Sometimes it burns everything down around you until there's nothing left but ashes and unanswered questions. This is how one Valentine's Day turned into an inferno. One that still haunts me every time February rolls around again. That's the end of these 7 Valentine's Day true chilling stories. What do you think about all these stories? Let us know your opinion in the comments box, and don't forget to subscribe to Horror Vault to continue watching such interesting true stories regularly. I will see you in the next video.